Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson, and today I'd like to give my thoughts on a game I just beat, that game being Mega Man 2 for the PS4. Mega Man 2 is a 2D action platformer developed and published by Capcom. It is considered to be one of the best video games of all time. Even if you disagree with that, its influence is very clear, with many developers citing it as inspiration for their works, its soundtrack having some of the most recognizable and memorable tracks on the NES, and Mega Man 2 being the best-selling Mega Man game in Capcom's library. Mega Man 2 came about a year after the original release, with Capcom giving the okay to develop the game despite the first's inability to sell past expectations. Instead, it was developed in the team's spare time while they were working on other games, with much of the unused content from the first being used here. I think the result of their work definitely lives up to the legacy that follows this title, but why do I think that way? Well, right off the bat, entering any level within the game shows immediately the graphical improvements that the Capcom development team managed to make. There are some new techniques and abilities being used here like tile layering, clearer and more detailed sprites, no more slowdown, smart uses of the color limitation, and some better animations that shows how the team learned from the development of the last title to bring out more of the NES than the very simple look of the last game. Hell, the opening title sequence alone is enough to pump up a player for what's to come. Accompanying the graphical improvements is a soundtrack done by Takashi Tateishi that is sure to grab your ear and hold your attention throughout the entire game. I don't think I feel negative about any of the cuts here. Tracks like Dr. Wily's Castle, Quickman, Woodman, and Airman are universally loved by players. Mega Man 2 also features some really great levels. The difficulty of these levels this time around is a lot more forgiving, with enemies being choreographed in a way so that the player notices them before having to face them. The level layouts themselves are a great example of how to guide the eye of the player throughout a screen, like Quickman's stage, for example, which has you falling vertically while avoiding instant killing lasers. These specific screens are like funnels, and the player is like water being poured into it. The movement and progression throughout all of the levels just feels so natural and logical. Also, with the graphical improvements spoken about earlier, the levels within Mega Man 2 are all diverse. No level looks alike. My favorite levels visually have to be Airman's stage, Woodman's stage, and Flashman's stage. There are also some pretty fun mechanics thrown into these levels, like water physics, chase sequences, and light sources that, when destroyed, will darken the entire screen. All of these additions really added to the experience of Mega Man 2, and really differentiated it from its predecessor. Fighting Robot Masters in any order while gaining their weapons also makes a comeback here, but now the game features 8 Robot Masters instead of 6. Also, the Wily stages count up to 5 instead of 3 this time, making content within the game feel like it was expanded. However, despite the growth in the level count, the time it takes to beat the game stays relatively the same from its predecessor. In my opinion, the weapons the player gets throughout Mega Man 2 are much more creative, varied, and fun to use. There are weapons like the Metal Blade that doesn't take too much ammo to use and can be shot either straight or diagonally, or the Crash Bomber, which is a sticky bomb that can destroy certain walls and takes a bit of time before it explodes. One of the most interesting weapons introduced here is the Atomic Fire weapon that can be charged, then fired to produce this big damaging death ball, which is kind of foreshadowing the Mega Buster that would come later on in the series. Another big addition to the Mega Man series here is the support items that the player can get from Dr. Light. These items can help the player through a level if they're having trouble. For example, item 2 is like a hoverboard that the player can stand on, which then moves them horizontally throughout a level, and thus they can skip any hazards that they don't want to deal with. I especially like how these support items become a required part of the game later on, making them have more of a use than just optional content that the player can use to progress. I also have some smaller things of note here for Mega Man 2. One of them is that Mega Man 2 presents its story within its game this time around with the opening cinematic. I always like it more when the story is in the game, rather than being in some manual or something like the Grimoire cards from Destiny. There was also only one level throughout the game that I absolutely hated, and it's the one that's right before the boss rush stage. This stage has a couple things that I really dislike about it. First are the floors that you can fall through, but you don't know which ones they are because they use the same tiles. And the reason why I hate these is by the time you get to them, the player isn't given a chance to learn how to identify them without a punishment being present. I would have much rather have a safe scenario where the player can fall and not take damage or be right in front of an enemy. Also within this level are these narrow moving platforms over these instant killing spikes. But there are also enemies that spawn right on the path that these platforms move on. And with Mega Man's knockback that will happen when he takes damage, players will be dying at this section of the level a lot here. I think just simply getting rid of the enemies would have made this experience a lot better. The final thing I hated was the boss of this stage, that can only be damaged using the Crash Bomber, but this boss is also protected by walls that can only be destroyed by that weapon, and thus the player will always run out of that weapon's ammo before they can destroy the boss. Technically there's a way to beat this boss without dying, but it's so non-specific and ill-communicated that you're better off using the save state system from the Legacy Collection or an emulator. There are also some issues from the previous title that carried over to this game. For example, there's sprite flickering, which can make it hard to tell if an enemy is going to shoot or if their iframes are over, or etc, etc, etc. I also still don't like the way that switching weapons flows. I still find it a bit slow, and there are still cheesable situations throughout this game using pausing and unpausing. But it's safe to say that I feel the same way most others feel about Mega Man 2. It's smart and fun to play. I'm gonna give Mega Man 2 a final score of an 8 out of 10. I think that one stage that I hated deserves a point taken off of the final score, as well as the problems that carried over from the last title. And so that concludes my review of Mega Man 2. I had a lot of fun playing through it. If you liked this video, you can like, comment, or subscribe. I also have my social media links and my Portfolium down in the description below. So without out of the way, please make sure to have a nice day.